Today's presentation will be a panel discussion by three area journalists. Tom Shine is Director of News and Public Affairs at KMUW. He joined the station in 2017 after spending 37 years at the Wichita Eagle in a variety of reporting and editing roles. At KMUW, Tom directs the station's news coverage. He also helps coordinate coverage with the Kansas News Service, a journalism collaborative composed of public radio stations in Wichita, Kansas City, Lawrence, and Garden City. Tom also is host of The Range, a weekly show on KMUW that brings you stories of where we live and the people who live here. Joe Stump is editor of The Active Age, a monthly newspaper with 54,000 circulation in Sedgwick, Butler, and Harvey counties. From 2000 to 2009, he was food editor of the Wichita Eagle. Earlier in his career, he worked for newspapers in Texas, Tulsa, and Little Rock, specializing in coverage of crime and politics. Mr. Stump studied journalism at the University of Missouri-Columbia. Amy DeVault is a faculty member in the Elliott School of Communication at Wichita State University and is the faculty advisor to the Sunflower Student newspaper. She teaches classes in journalism and visual communication, and she is co-founder and instructor of the popular Flint Hills Media Project. In 2020, she helped launch the Wichita Journalism Collaborative. Amy serves as an officer for the Kansas Pro chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists and is active serving and teaching for several student media organizations, including Kansas Scholastic Press Association, Associated Collegiate Press, and the National Scholastic Press Association. Before joining the faculty at Wichita State in 2007, Amy worked at the Wichita Eagle. She earned a bachelor's degree in English from Fort Hays State University and a master's degree in journalism from Kansas State University, working for the college newspapers at both universities. And now we're ready to begin.
Thanks, Megan. I'm Tom Shine. As Megan said, the topic today, where to get your news, we could talk about 3 hours on that, but I don't think anybody would stay for 3 hours, so we'll try to condense that down. I would welcome, and as would Amy and Joe, your questions about the news and news coverage, the media, both local and national, and your thoughts about or your questions about that. I'll start with myself, and Amy and Joe will start with a couple of comments about our thoughts, and then we can go to questions after that, or we can ask questions among ourselves. I'm old enough that I actually worked on the Beacon, which gives an idea of which I had two newspapers. The Beacon folded in 1980, although I was not responsible for that. But back then, you had the Eagle, you had the Beacon, you had 3 local TV stations, and you had 3 national news outlets. And that was pretty much your entire media landscape. That was it. If you didn't get your news from them, you didn't really get your news from anybody else. The challenge now is there is so much information. I mean, just endless amounts of information. And the question is, how do you sort through all that? Is it reliable? Do they have a vetting process? Are there editors there? Is it some guy in his grandma's basement just putting out a blog post that's about the news? So part of the challenge now, there is just so much to choose from. You can't turn anywhere without running into the news. And of course, then there's also the issue of social media, spreading news that's true, spreading news that's sometimes not true. That adds a whole new element that, we obviously didn't have up until the 2000s of using social media to spread news. So a lot of people can get your news just from social media. So there's that whole aspect of it as well. And then of course, with the proliferation of news sources, there's been a move to news sources with a distinct political bent. Fox News is sort of the most obvious one. MSNBC is another one, but there's a whole host of media, both TV and print and digital, that have specific bents on how they cover things from a political lens. And to me, that adds another layer of difficulty in trying to sort through the news. To me, the biggest single change, and there's been just thousands of them, is that the media is no longer the gatekeeper. And what I mean by that, it used to be when you picked up your Eagle or your Beacon off your front driveway, and there was 4 stories on the front page and then a bunch of stories behind it. Someone at the Eagle has decided you need to read these stories today. These, in our opinion, are the most important, most impactful, most reliable stories today that you need to read. Um, and, and anymore. And then TV was, here's our top 5 stories of the day on TV. Well, now consumers are the gatekeepers. You can get, since I've been sitting here, I've gotten three notices, email alerts about the new Secretary of State being confirmed from 3 separate news outlets. Media consumers can now decide who they want to get news from, how they want to get it delivered, and what topics they want to cover. So you're your own editor. You're curating the news for your personal use and personal information. You don't need the Eagle to say, well, here's the top 5 stories. Oh, no, here's the 5 stories I want to read. And I want them delivered to me on my phone, in my email, however I want to get them. And I want them now. So that's, to me, has been the biggest change, is the whole shift from media, from gatekeepers in the media to consumers are gatekeepers now. And to me, that's a huge change in how we disseminate news. One of the other big changes, of course, is the barrier to entering the media is much lower now. You know, back in the day when the Eagle and Beacon were around, if you wanted to start a competing newspaper, I think the Wichita Sun was around for a little while as a competing newspaper. There was a considerable amount of cost involved in that. Printing presses, you had to have offices, you had to have reporters. I mean, it was really expensive. You had to deliver it. And now with the with online and social media and the internet, one person can do that. And as a result, we're seeing a lot of startups now, smaller startups. There's a great one in Kansas City area called the Shawnee Mission Post. Husband and wife were unhappy with the coverage from the Kansas City Star of particularly the school board in Shawnee Mission. Didn't think it was getting enough coverage. So they started going to the meetings and then posting about it on Facebook. And then they suddenly realized, well, there's a whole bunch of people reading this and sharing it and commenting on it. They started an old publication called the Shawnee Mission Post that covers Shawnee Mission area news and information, mostly at the board level or meeting level. They now have a full-time staff and it's a full-time operation all on the web. So the barrier is much lower too, which again is why we're seeing so many startups. The Beacon, which is a startup in Kansas City that's coming to Wichita, and we'll probably talk about them today, is a startup recent. The Kansas Reflector is a startup out of Topeka that covers State House news, and there's a couple other ones in Topeka already. So the barrier is much lower for someone to enter the media industry, because really if you have a phone and an internet connection, you're a member of the media and can participate and post stories and post pictures and post video, post commentary, and share to any, millions of people at the press of a button. So that's a big sea change in how the media works. Joe, I'm going to stop there and let you jump in here if you don't mind.
Okay. Well, I think Tom gave a great overview of a lot of the big changes that have taken place recently. From my perspective, I've been in the business, I guess, 32 years now. And I think that the single biggest influence on what's happened to the media in the past few years has obviously been the internet. There's always newspapers among all the media were the primary providers of news, because we had the biggest staffs, we had the most time to look into issues and so forth. And when the internet came around, the newspapers, it hurt us in 2 ways. First of all, newspapers rushed to put all their content on the internet where people could get it for free as opposed to subscribing. So that therefore killed the revenue base, and they had to start laying off staff and so forth. And then the other thing was a lot of advertising shifted to the internet. So that was another huge loss for the newspapers. So as they've cut their staff, they've become less able to provide a comprehensive picture of what's going on in the community and the world. And so there wasn't much, I'm not sure what the newspapers could have done about the internet, but I do think that they've also dealt themselves a bad blow over the past 4 to 8 years by becoming the news business itself has become very partisan. I don't think anybody can look at it objectively and not conclude that. At least I can't. And in some respects, it's a swing back to the very beginning of the news business. Newspapers were started by political parties in Great Britain, and they were closely affiliated with those parties. And it wasn't until I think probably late in the 1800s that in the early 1900s, anything developed where there was newspapers were going to be this independent source of news. They weren't going to be tied to a political party. They were going to, hold everybody accountable. And now that's shifted again to where most of the news outfits out there, it's pretty easy to see which side of any political question they come down on, in my opinion. And I think that's hurt their credibility. And unfortunately, the audience seems drawn to that. A lot of people are creating their own media bubble by just reading the stories that they agree with. And it just reinforces their beliefs and has probably a pretty divisive effect on society. So that's how I see things. Now I will throw it to Amy.
Hi, thanks, Tom and Joe. I just want to chat a little bit about the importance of local journalism, what we risk in losing it, and then talk a little bit about the Wichita Journalism Collaborative, an initiative that's been underway for about 8 months now. And I'm going to share my screen. Okay, you should be looking at a lot of faces here. These are all local journalists. They're all local journalists who are working in newsrooms that do participate in the Wichita Journalism Collaborative. And had we thrown up the same group of people from the same organizations 20 years ago, they would be little bitty pinheads because this screen would be probably quadrupled in size, at least, the number of people. I just can't talk to people right now without reminding of people about why we have journalism and need journalism. Here's your little democracy reminder for the day, your civics lesson, I guess, if you will. There are 3 branches of government, both at the state and national level. You have the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. They're referred to as the 3 estates, right? And the purpose is that there's a checks and balances among the 3 of them. You often hear of journalists in the journalism industry referred to as the 4th estate. And that's because while it wasn't written into government, they are the watchdogs over government. It's their job to keep tabs on the people we elect to spend our money to make decisions about what happens in our country, in our state, and in our cities. When you have strong local journalism, research has shown that it reduces government corruption. It makes citizens more knowledgeable and engaged with politics and government. It increases their voting. It's been shown that a strong local journalism that people are really engaging with reduces split ticket voting, which I found kind of interesting. And it makes our elected officials more accountable, responsible, and efficient. When you lose good local journalism and they lose their professional capacity to do their jobs, meaning they don't have enough resources or people don't trust them, then it becomes more difficult to fill this role, and elected officials go unwatched, which increases government corruption, and citizens just genuinely become less engaged in the government and in politics. Both Joe and Tom have mentioned, but I think it's always interesting to look at the business model for newspapers. And I think a lot of people assume that it's the decrease in circulation that has really hurt newspapers. And while that is a little piece of it, it's certainly not the thing that really started the decline in their revenue. It was the decline in advertising. We had Craigslist come about, and I don't know the year, I should look that up, of when Craigslist came about, but that killed classified advertising, which was a huge revenue source for newspapers. And along came the internet. In 2004, I believe, Facebook opened up to anyone. I think it was 2007 when Twitter came about, but we had social media. So if you look at this chart and you look at what happened to advertising revenue, you'll see that those fall along the same lines as when those things happened. So as a direct reflection of that revenue decrease, what happened is that the newsroom shrunk. They started laying off employees. Tom and Joe and I all were at the Eagle for a few years at the same time. And if I had to guess, I would say we had 60 people maybe in the newsroom. That would have been in the early 2000s.
I think it was
Tom?
higher, probably closer to the mid 80s.
I was trying to be conservative, but I know in the old Eagle building, my parking spot was all the way out almost to the trees. So when you started, you got the back parking spots. So this kind of shows that decline. The same has not been exactly true with other media, with newspapers, radio, and now some internet-based news organizations. But newsrooms at traditional newspapers have just absolutely plummeted. I believe there are 11 reporters at the Wichita Eagle now, and I think no more than 15 total staff, including editors and photographers. So the big question at hand, the $1 million question, is how do we keep local journalism and keep it strong? And I wish that someone had the perfect answer for that. So in moving into the Wichita Journalism Collaborative back in February of 2020, when we didn't know what was about to hit, some of us were gathering together and talking about the idea of starting a news collaborative in Wichita, meaning a group of media partners and some local partners as well. In fact, the library is one of our community partners. And how could we listen to our audience's needs? How could we learn from them what stories were important and that we should cover? And then also just how could we help bolster good quality local journalism? So that was February of 2020. We had been meeting January and February, and we had just drafted a grant to the Solutions Journalism Network to get some funding to help us launch, and we're hit with the pandemic like the rest of the world. So that sort of threw a wrench in what we had planned, but we did go ahead and move forward. We retooled the grant. We wrote a memorandum of understanding, and what that means is how are our partners going to work together? How will they share content? What does that look like? Because for some of the media partners, this is a very new thing, right? Newsrooms are sort of trenched in competition. Who's going to be first? Who's going to get this story that somebody else doesn't have? So there was a lot to work through in thinking about how we would actually work together. And this shows you who the partners of the Wichita Journalism Collaborative are, both media partners and community partners. And then just a rough definition, a coalition formed to support and enhance quality local journalism and build trust by listening to community voices and supporting reporting that is responsive to community issues and problems. We launched with really COVID, which was the story of the year, as our topic, and really trying to look at responses to the problems caused by by COVID. We wanted to help partners coordinate that coverage. A goal for me was to try to help the news organizations not each be covering the same exact story every day. If one outlet is doing story X, is it our best use of resources collectively for every outlet to do that same story? And I would argue no. Why not have one partner do that story share so that the other local journalists can add to the stories that are being told and shared? We just wanted to maximize those resources because they have shrunk so much in our city and around the country. Through collaboration, sharing things, and some co-reporting, which is we've found harder to do, where media outlets work together on stories. The Active Age, where Joe is the editor, really took some of the lead and jumped into doing reporting on long-term care homes and how COVID was affecting them. And they shared those stories with the group. And most of the partners were quick to publish those stories. We filed an open records request to find out how the county was spending some of the CARES money. We did a survey trying to find out what people's experiences were with being tested for COVID. We're trying to do as much translating as we can so that stories that we knew that Spanish speaking only audiences needed, we try to translate those and make sure those get shared to those audiences. Huge goal, combating misinformation and media literacy education. So we did one sort of campaign, if you will, where we offered tips on social media for making sure that the information that you are consuming and sharing is accurate. We need to do a lot more of that. And then another goal is just to listen to the community and figure out how we can help answer the questions that they have. Whoops. There have been a lot of challenges to starting the journalism collaborative, but I still believe strongly that it has merit and can be one thing to help with local journalism, but certainly it's going to take a lot more than that. There are a lot of philanthropists and foundations who are throwing money at local journalism right now. And that might be a good stopgap, but I don't know how long that will continue. There might come a point at which that runs out, and we've got to figure out a way to support it. So I think we're ready for some questions if there are some.
There aren't any yet.
Okay.
There aren't
well,
any yet.
I will ask a question then. I'll answer first, and I'll ask Joe and Amy. The exact title of this is where do you get your news? And I get that question asked a lot. Where do you get your news? And I think I'm not that unusual. I get mine from a variety of sources. I don't rely on just one source. I read the Eagle. I read Cadence.com. Of course, I listen to KMW and edit those stories. I watch local TV news or go to their websites. I'm a big fan of the Associated Press, which is pretty much a meat and potatoes, just the facts, ma'am, kind of a website. They've been around for a million years. I also look at the newspapers where my children happen to live in Seattle, Los Angeles, and Kansas City, just to kind of see what's happening there. I watch some CNN and some Fox, not a lot, but I try to watch. If I watch one, I try to watch the other, just to see, when stories are percolating, what the perspective is from different sides, I guess, of the political divide. But to me, the biggest key is getting news from a variety of sources. When I see something on social media that says, Pope dating Lady Gaga, my first inclination is not to retweet that. My first inclination is to say, really? Is that true? And then I go find out and check it out and realize that it's not true. But I tend to do a lot of stories that, will say something that doesn't seem quite right, and I'll check it out. That's a journalism trait, I guess. But I get my news from a variety of sources to try to get different perspectives on the same story. Amy, what about you?
My answer is fairly similar, a variety of sources. I feel like I consume a lot of news, and I am a newspaper person. So I tend to lean to newspapers. I don't watch a lot of TV news. I watch almost no national TV news unless there's a big story and I go seeking it out because I know that there's something going on and I want to know what's happening. I read the Eagle, Kansas.com. If I'm in the car, I'm absolutely listening to KMUW. I read the Washington Post fairly religiously, the New York Times some. And again, if I'm like Tom, if there's a story that interests me, then I'll try to read about it from a couple different sources and perspectives. And I read the Sunflower, a little plug for the Sunflower. I am a member of the Wichita State community, and I don't read what they write before it's published. So I definitely learn things from the Sunflower about what's going on our campus.
Hey, Amy, I just saw a question pop up, and I'll preempt it. Someone wanted to know how to look at material from the WJC. You want to tell them where that stuff's at?
Sure. We have a website. It's wichitajournalism.com. We have a Facebook page, which you should be able to find, and we are on Twitter. And on Twitter, it is @ICT_journalism. We do, we try to push people to our media partners more than really being our own entity. So we do try to collate everything that partners share and everything that we do centrally from the collaborative, but we really want people visiting our partners' websites. But yeah, Carol shared the website there. Thank you.
There is a question about how can the average citizen support WJC?
We have not started doing any fundraising yet. If we feel like we are successful and we move into year 2, then that will have to be part of our plan. The grant that is supporting us right now will go for 2 years, hopefully. And during that second year, we would have to consider, do we want to become a nonprofit so that we can fundraise? So right now, you know, it's reading our stories, sharing our stories, answering questions when we ask them, you know, when we're trying to listen to our audience to know what it is we should be talking about and covering. Those are some ways.
And then can a novice investigative journalist join WJC?
That's a great question with not an easy answer. Because we started the way we did in a pandemic, the partners have agreed to just hold at what we are for the first year as far as partners. But as we near the end of our first year, then we will need to start discussing, you know, bringing in new partners. We do hire freelance journalists to do work for us on occasion. So reaching out, you can reach out to me at amy@wichitajournalism.com, which can certainly add you to our list of potential freelancers.
Joe, what about you? Where do you get your news?
My list is similar to both of yours. I always start every day with the with the Wichita Eagle paper version. I'm old school that way. And I'll check on their website a couple of times during the day. I check out KMUW's website more than listening to it because I'm just not good about, unless I'm in the car, I'll listen to it. And then also I go, if my wife gets both the New York Times and Washington Post on her computer. So if I have access to that, I might check it out. I don't watch much TV news. I do check CNN and Fox's news sites because even though I think they're both pretty partisan, they have some interesting stories, and it's kind of being like in alternate realities because they used to just cover the same stories from different angles. Now they generally just ignore if you see a story on Fox, it's probably not going to be on CNN and vice versa. It's like I said, just kind of alternate reality there.
That's interesting. I also saw a quick chat, Amy. Someone wants to know how they can read the sunflower.
I am just typing.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, I'll let you do that. Megan, do we have other questions?
Yes. Is Snopes still the leading fact-finding source?
I don't know if it's I'm familiar with Snopes. I did not get on Snopes much. To me, they're more of I've always been sort of more of an urban legend debunker than an factual news source. I've been on there in a long time, so maybe I need to get back on. I probably wouldn't call them the leading one, but it's an interesting site. But I've been on it for a long time.
The leading one?
I would not call it the leading one.
Is there one that is good?
Well, it kind of depends, I guess. Again, I fall back to if I want just sort of straight up, just the facts, I go to the Associated Press. They've been around again forever. Most news operations, left and right, carry them. They're well sourced, cover the whole world type of a thing, and their fallback is they try to get stuff up as quickly and as succinctly as possible. So they tend to do short, quick stories. They do the occasional investigation, but it tends to be short. This is what's happening kind of stuff. They do really good sports reporting as well. It's just sort of the same thing. Here's who won. Here's the leading scores. Yada yada yada. To me, they're a good initial source of when something is breaking and what's happening because they tend to update quite a bit.
Okay, one that leads that line that leads into local stations, Eagle, AP, both Fox and MSNBC, CNN. Where do the Washington Post, the New York Times, and BBC fit? There's somebody who's looking for a broad perspective.
Joe, you want to take that one since you read a couple of those?
Well, the New York Times has a huge staff, and they, have great news coverage from completely around the world, which is probably the only American newspapers can say that anymore. I don't watch the BBC. What was the other publication?
Post.
I just read it every once in a while. Good coverage of DC politics. Not too much else that I'm interested in from that publication. New York Times still has tremendous feature sections as well. And it still take you half a day to get through their Sunday paper. So
I mean, they cover the books and the arts and features and food. I mean, they also do about, got 110 newsletters or some crazy number like that on every topic imaginable. If you just want to get a feed into your phone or your email, they have all the topics. I will say that the BBC, we run an hour of the BBC every day, midday at KMEW. Different perspective on American news. It's interesting. And we also run them at midnight. If you're still up at midnight, we run them overnight. But just a different perspective. I think it's very smart news, very interesting, but it's certainly a different lens through the world from the BBC.
Okay. Going back to maybe some of the fact finding and what I've done before, so I don't know if other people have done this, this would be a good budding issue, is like you mentioned, the AP was a good source. So I've gotten on AP News before, something will come up, is this valid or not? And so I'll do searches, but I don't always do, obviously, the right search. Because you can't, it's hard. With Snopes, you can ask a question and then it usually has the question on there somewhere that you can kind of get an overview. That the AP News is not set up that way. And so then what I've done is I've just done a question without getting like on AP News to kind of get an overall view of where something might have been printed about that subject was. Is that a good approach, or what's your input? Is there a better way to approach figuring out what is actually the news and what isn't?
I'm not sure there's a good approach. I'm sure, I mean, I'll give you an example. For me, my wife, who was also a news consumer, former Norton Daily Telegram reporter back in the day, was reading, social media and said, there was a tweet saying that, chastising Joe Biden for banning fracking, even though he said during his campaign that he would not ban fracking. And she said, does he ban fracking? And I don't keep up with fracking news. So I said, I don't know. So I typed into my search, did Joe Biden ban fracking? And then I hit the news tab. So all the news stories that come up. I got 5 stories that came up about that. He's banned it apparently on federal lands, which is his purview. But he has not banned it on private lands because he can't. He's not allowed to do that. So there was a couple. Forbes had a story. AP did not have a story. So I often just type in what I'm looking for, the question I'm trying to answer. Did so-and-so do so? Is the Pope dating Lady Gaga? And I'll type that in and see what pops up under the news tab. And then I kind of am familiar enough. Like one of the things for Biden was Forbes. It's a well-known magazine, well-respected magazine. And digital site. So business magazine. So I read their story and about it and included in there that he's getting pushback that he has banned it. So I just type in and look for news sources I'm familiar with and that I trust, and then try to read those stories.
Okay, one question is misinformation and personal attacks on journalists and on social media. How can we be allies online for area journalists?
I'll let you do that one, Amy.
That's a great question. And there are many ways, I think. One is just sharing good journalism, right? None of us mentioned that we get our news from social media, but we probably would all be lying if we said we didn't get some of our news from social media. Some of what you click on, are things that our friends have shared, and that might lead you to more stuff. But share good journalism, share local journalism, remind people. There are a lot of people complaining about, I see every day, I feel like comments on the Wichita Eagle stories that say, oh, I can't read this, wish I could read this, and sometimes people will copy and paste the story. But if we want local journalists, someone has to pay their salary, right? Somebody has to pay that bill. And because advertising is not cutting it anymore, that revenue, at least for newspapers right now, has to come from circulation. So encourage people to subscribe, even if sometimes they bother you or you think that not everything they report or share is your favorite. Support them by subscribing, I guess, is the number one way. And then supporting them If you see local journalists attacked and you feel like it's unwarranted, then say something, you know. Those are some ideas.
What I always try to do when I'm in a conversation with somebody and they'll say, oh, the media this, well, I always ask them, well, specifically, where did you see that? Where did you see that story? And often they haven't seen it or read it, or they've just heard it from somebody. You know, the media is a really broad brush. I mean, the media is everything from the Eagle to the Sunflower to Fox to the National Enquirer. And it's a big universe, is the media. So I always ask when someone complains about the media, complains about something the media did wrong, I ask them to specifically say which media or where did they see that. And often, in most cases here, they're talking about national media, not local media. But we get painted with the same brush, unfortunately, which I think is wrong. I also think obviously attacking a journalist on social media is wrong. I know it's a thing, and I still think it's wrong. My advice, if you're the subject of a story or you read a story you disagree with, contact the journalist directly, over the phone or by email. Most journalists really work hard to get stories right, and they are aghast and when they get something wrong and painfully wounded by it. So you know the thing that they just sort of throw stuff out there. Most media news organizations have a level of editing that goes through before it hits the air or it hits digital, and they care deeply if it's wrong. And so I just would contact them directly. Joe, I know you've made at least one mistake in your career, maybe not more than one.
Yeah.
But you know, I mean, you know what it's like to try to get stuff. You try to get stuff right.
Yeah, it's embarrassing, and you wish you could do it over again. But most, like you said, most journalists I know would be anxious to correct an error if it's brought to their attention. And frankly, it's easier to do it now. You can do it immediately, at least online. You don't have to wait for the next news site, next day's newspaper. Somebody mentioned about there being some good publications in our area cities, and I agree that the smaller town papers do an excellent job, and to some extent, I think they may be doing better business-wise than bigger papers, because you don't think so?
No, I don't believe that's true.
I don't know. When I see them, they have a decent amount of advertising, but I think they cover some stories that those communities, really appreciate, and I think they do a good job in that respect. And on the issue of support, I'd point out too that in addition to subscribing, like our publication, we don't have paid subscription. We have a lot of donors. Donations make up about somewhere between a fourth and third of our budget every year. And I'd guess that maybe for you, Tom, they make even more.
It is. It's well more than half, because we like you are a nonprofit.
Yeah. So for a nonprofit, donations are obviously key to support.
Okay, we have also for everyone a couple good fact-finding sources from Amy DeVault is factcheck.org and politifact.org. It's part of the chat. I
also would say that Pointer, which is it's POYNTER, pointer.org. They are what would you call them? Kind of a media think tank, I guess would be a good way. They offer a lot of programming and stuff. They maintain a fairly vigorous fact-checking operation that you can get, again, sent to you in a newsletter if you want. And they go through the week's, biggest stuff that's just not true. And you can get that sent to you as well. But pointer.org is actually a very good media site. It covers the media, reports on the media, things like that. It's a very good site. It's more of a media person site, but if you're interested in the media, a lot of good stories on there about the media and shrinking newspapers and things like that.
And Pointer, they're not afraid to call out journalists when they do the wrong thing. It really it's a great discussion about what's happening in media and the journalism world.
And there is a comment on here that's like, please don't overlook the community newspapers in the Wichita area. The Valley Center, Derby, and Newton are all cities with excellent news publications. And someone also included the Community Voice.
Yes, I would say Newton. I think Newton has 2 newspapers, which is a lot of newspapers for Newton. But I think I think they are good. I think they are a good community source. I think a lot of them struggle with the same issues that big papers struggle with, staffing. There's been a huge consolidation. I think Gatehouse now owns 14 papers in the state of, corporate ownership, the reduction of staffing. I know when I get the Newton papers, we get a couple of them at the station. I look for byline counts, how many bylines I see, and I never see more than 2 people's names that each have about, a dozen stories each. But some of those papers, and Derby would be one, I think are struggling with staffing, advertising. Most of those small papers live on the community grocery store. That's a huge advertiser, as it is for the Eagle. And with, places like Walmart coming in or Dollar General coming in and replacing grocery stores, you had another impact of not having a local grocery stores. It really helps the local newspaper as well.
With shrinking newsrooms, how is the trend related to early career professionals? Have we seen a reduction in the numbers of young people entering journalism?
Go ahead, Amy. Start that. I'll follow up with a thought.
It's an excellent question. I felt like we went through a little period where our number of journalism majors and, a trend that I had heard from across the country was declining. Interestingly, there was an uptick in 2017 and 18, as young people became a little more interested in politics and what was going on, and they saw what journalists were doing and how they were being talked about. So those numbers have climbed a little bit back up. But I will also say that our young journalists, the ones who do it right, who do all the things in colleges they should do, they work for the student paper, they do an internship, those young journalists are not having trouble finding jobs, most of them. And, there are probably a lot of reasons for that. One being the layoff of some seasoned journalists, which is not a good thing either. But
I ran the Eagles internship program for about 20 years, and then I run one at KMUW. So I've seen a lot of sort of early career journalists get out. And that would include my son, who spent 10 years in the business and just said, I don't think it can sustain me for the rest of my life. And it was, at that point, I'd just been laid off. So it was hard to argue that. And he's going to work in communications. He is, however, engaged to a New York Times reporter. So we do have that going for us. But I've seen a lot of young people in their late 20s, like he was, maybe 7-8 years in, if switched and gotten out. Really talented people too. And to me, that's a major concern of mine going forward, that these are the people who are going to be able to maybe figure this out. It's not going to be me. It's going to be much younger people who have grown up in a digital era and understand it better. And they're leaving in big numbers. And then the other concern I have is really good young journalists. Chance Swain would be one who came through Wichita State, was an Eagle intern, just a really good journalist. I worry about young journalists like him in a newsroom getting the mentoring and editing that they need, more of the mentoring part of that, and learning from others. And he has a good role model in Diane Leffler, but a lot of newsrooms don't have that mentoring like I had when I started, that mentoring and guidance and things like that for young journalists. I worry about that quite a bit too.
With that in mind, how are the upstarts? Will the upstarts sustain outlets like the Eagle, or will they replace them as a nonprofit basis like KMUW? I guess I see, I've read different things about the Eagle and Gatehouse, and a lot of times it seems like they absorb money out of those organizations. Is the news future the nonprofits?
A lot of, and Joe can answer this, but I'll start, but then Joe, you jump in because you would know this. Even when you're a nonprofit like KMUW, you still got to pay people. I still get paid. So you still have to raise money and earn money. Now you have the ability to get grants, get money from foundations and so on. But there's a whole bunch of other nonprofits swimming in that same pool, also trying to get grants and money from those foundations as well. So it's not like you're going to be there all by yourself. There's a whole bunch of other nonprofits fighting for that money. And as a nonprofit, you still have to make money. You still have to sell advertising, as we do at KMUW. get donations from people. So it's not like to me, it's a lot of people think it's just, well, that'll solve all your problems. Well, no, not really. It creates another set of challenges to be a nonprofit. And Joe, you would know that as a nonprofit.
Yeah, it's run pretty similar. We have three legs of revenue. Advertising is the biggest, and then our reader donations, and then get one grant from the government, Older Americans Act, and all three are definitely important. I think that is going to be the future of a lot of the media, and then I forgot to mention we're getting the great support from Wichita Journalism Collaborative, which has funded a lot of our reporting during the pandemic, and I hope that doesn't go away anytime soon, because I don't know what's going to replace it, frankly.
I guess I wasn't thinking so much as not like contributing to KMUW and nonprofits. I think what concerns a lot of people is it seems like you said, the Eagle, your next door neighbor can be paying a completely different amount than what you're paying. And excuse me, a lot of times it seems a little absorbent, and you wonder if that money's being funneled out of the community.
I think that's been the case for the Eagle since Knight Ritter owned it. I think since Ritter owned it, and that goes back a long time. That's one of your issues of corporate ownership, is that they're going to take some of that money. That's part of the deal. They're also going to give you money for capital improvements, things like that. When the Eagle, not that they use it anymore, but when they put in the big printing press in 2000, that was a corporate project. Some of the corporate owners have worse reputations than McClatchy. I think Gatehouse has a bad one. Advance, I think, has not got a good one, where they strip down the staffing quite a bit. They tend to use, I think you're seeing it at the Eagle more, and continuing to be more and more Kansas City type content in the paper, because Kansas City is a sister paper, and Kansas City is sort of the hub for several Midwestern papers. And so they tend to share more, and they tend to get more Kansas City stuff. But there's no doubt that money leaves the community, but that's been the case for a long time. And that's the case for, when Boeing was here, or when, places like that. I mean, it goes somewhere else, and that's part of the deal. The problem is that newspapers are, in my mind, are different than making airplanes, and that there's, as Amy pointed out, there's a little civics involved in that, a little government involved in that. It should not be a bottom line only consideration. It needs to be also a First Amendment consideration, but it's certainly become much more of a bottom line consideration in the last 10 years or so.
And in return for that corporate ownership, and I'm also, not a fan of all the layoffs that have happened at the Wichita Eagle, but they still do quality, important local journalism. And in return for that money going out of the community, they have access to databases and research and reporters all over the country who work at other McClatchy papers. So there is a return, but the question is, what's that balance? And if we support them, are we truly supporting our local journalists? It's a valid question.
Are you saying that the local journalism does not have access to some of those databases? And
well, there are a lot of services, and Tom and Joe probably both know better than me on this, but there are a lot of things you have to pay a lot of money to subscribe to. And for smaller organizations, a lot of times it's just not a possibility. Okay,
and then there's also somebody's adding to the local sources, the TS News, the Times Sentinel, Hayesville Sun-Times, Conway Springs Star, Cover News for Argonia, Cheney, Clearwater, Garden City, and Goddard. Much appreciated by folks like me in small towns, because the small towns do get pushed out. So some of these smaller outlets cover your smaller town venues.
Yeah, and I think that's true. And I think anyone who's working at one of those smaller, whether it's a weekly or twice a week or whatever, they're working hard, and they're doing an important service to those communities. The question is that a sustainable financial model going forward for forever? I don't know, because I don't know the finances of the Cheney paper, for instance. But it's a tough go for all sort of traditional media, big and small. And I think the smaller ones have some advantages, but also some disadvantages too. But I don't think there's any question that, it gets back to the root core of solid, reliable, vetted information that people want, whether it's the Cheney School Board, whether it's the Kansas School Board, whether it's the Department of Education. That's what they want, and someone's got to go to that meeting and deliver it, and that costs money, and then you have to support that by buying it.
I don't know how to ask this question. Can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Yep.
How do you get a media to cover news that it's not covering? I think back to 1958 when there was a sit-in and it didn't even make it to the newspapers. The sit-in at the corner Dockham Drug I'm talking about. And same thing about here is what do we do to get local media to, I know that they're short on reporters and sometimes they can't get reporters there, but how do you get media to cover things that they're not covering that they ought to?
I'm gonna start real quick, and then Amy, I'll let you jump in. But I'm pretty sure, Ernestine, I have seen photos and stories from the Dockham sit-in in historical pieces from, I think it's either the Eagle or the Beacon.
Yes, it was, and it was a very small article, even though it was a very enormous issue. But
Sure.
You're right.
Right. So anyway, Amy, I'll let you answer that, or Joe.
Go ahead if you have an idea.
Well, I'm always interested in getting story ideas from the public. So I would say if you have something you want the news organization to cover, call them up or email them. And if you don't hear back from them, call them, email them again, pester them. Most news organizations still are on the lookout for news, even if they're understaffed. They want to serve the community. They want to cover the issues that are important. So I would not be hesitant about bringing it to their attention.
And when you
mentioned
try to
go ahead, Amy.
When you do reach out, try to help them understand the editor or the reporter that you're reaching out to, try to help them understand who's interested in that story and why. You know, just try to make a good pitch for why it's a story that really they should cover.
Yeah, going back to what I was saying earlier about gatekeepers and who's the gatekeeper, newspapers have always had to pick and choose stories. And that goes back to when I started at the Eagle in 1980, and we had absorbed the entire Beacon newsroom as well. No one got laid off when the papers merged. We had about 150 people, which is just a ton. Even then, they had to pick and choose between stories. TV does it. We do it at KMUW. And news organizations with less people really have to pick and choose. So I would say, like Joe said, contact them. Try to explain why it's important and what it means, and then how you can help them get that story.
Well, I confess that that my question is a little loaded because here in Wichita, the local media does seem to avoid any stories that are negative about the Coke industries.
Mhm.
And so if there's something that comes up about Coke and you read it in the national, it doesn't show up in the local media because Coke is such an important financial base here in Wichita. And I just wondered, how do we get something like that covered, that the amount of money, for example, that's going into a particular campaign, or the fact that Coke a long time ago was doing something in a Colorado school district race. Those didn't get covered locally.
Well, then you have to ask the question: Is what Coke's doing in a Colorado school race a local story? It may be. I don't know. I would say that some of the coverage that Coke Industries gets, it's almost all of it nationally, is political in nature, campaign contributions, things like that. They do give a lot of money. A whole bunch of people give a lot of money to political campaigns. They are a difficult organization to cover because they are privately held. And so they're not forthcoming with a lot of information because they don't have to be. So they're tough to cover. I think a lot of the stuff that I see when I do read Coke stuff tends to be commentary. It's not necessarily, not unfact based, but it's more of a commentary, and it's more political based. That's it. But that, if you could bring me a story about Coke industry doing something, Ernestine, you can certainly email me something that we could report on and people should know about. I would have that conversation with you.
Okay.
And I just dropped a couple sunflower stories from the past few years that cover some Coke influence on Wichita State's campus. They are not afraid to cover.
Good.
You get time for one more question, Megan?
I could not find any other questions.
Okay, all right. Well, why don't we make real quick closing comments, if that's okay with you, Daniel, and then we can get out of here. I would just say, thank you for tuning in today. I think probably everyone who's here is probably a media consumer, which is why you're here. And I would say, as Amy I think said earlier, support local media through subscriptions, through donations, through whatever. But and that would include the Hayesville newspaper and the Derby Informer and all those other pieces of information, Sunflower, Active Age. Local media is highly important, and when it goes away, it's really hard for it to come back. The Beacon being an example of going away. So I would say that, and I would say that the journalists that I know, and I know a lot of them here over the years, care about it, care about the community and the city, care about the jobs they do. They work hard at it. It's a lot of hours in this business, but they do it because they think it's important, and I think it's important as well. And that's why they do it, and that's why we try to do what we can. So support them any way you can. Amy?
Mostly what Tom just said. I sometimes ask people to imagine a city where we don't have local journalists watching over our government, watching over our school boards and city councils. So from small to large, do what you can to support local journalism, just to make sure that we hold on to it. And that doesn't mean you're always going to agree with them or always think they do exactly the right thing. But imagine what kind of a situation we would be in if we didn't have those people.
And there was one question I missed. It was, how do you rate the PBS NewsHour?
I don't watch it. I don't watch it much. I think it's highly regarded, but I do not. It's kind of a bad time for me, and I don't watch it a lot. But I know it's very, very highly regarded, and I guess some people probably think of it as a left leaning, but I haven't watched enough to say that. Joe, you got a closing thought?
No, I think you all covered it pretty well. It is important that people stay informed, and the only way they're going to do that is if newspapers and the radio stations and other local media are around to do it, help them.
I agree.